So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Trevethan. I am the Education and Outreach Manager at Sternberg Museum of Natural History. Today I'm very, very lucky. I'm joined by my darling wife, Shannon. She is acting as camera woman for me. So I don't have to hold my camera and do my work at the same time. It's really cool having a second set of hands. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For helping. I put her on the spot. She doesn't want to say things. So, today is going to be a little bit different than what I normally do. Well, I mean, it's going to be what I normally do, but it's going to be a different format. So, I have been in the afternoons working on my exhibit that I'm hoping will be up and running when all of this crazy isolation, quarantine stuff is done, whatever that might be. So I've been working on an exhibit called From Mythology to Paleontology, and it pairs up mythological creatures like dragons and griffins and giants and cyclopses. Is that a word, cyclopses? I don't think it is.
No, I think it's just cyclops.
Anyways, we're pairing up these mythological animals or creatures with our paleontological and probably some of our zoological teaching specimens from the museum collection. So that's the idea behind the exhibit, in case you're just joining and have never heard me blab on in the last couple of days. So we're going to kind of revisit. I've got actually two projects going that relate to the exhibit itself, and then I've got a side project going that I'm just using for an example of how progress works on this stuff. So let's go over here to my workbench. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm at home because as it turns out, in this case, my home shop works for me a little bit better than the shop at the museum does. Mostly because I have a lot better ventilation here. I've got all of my paints here. I've got all of my carving tools here. So I don't have to make a huge mess for the people who are required employees that have to do their daily routine at the museum. I'm not in their way. So we'll take actually a look at our terrestrial dragon that we've been slowly working on. And so you'll notice I've got his lips painted now. I put his teeth back on. I'm working on his ear, or tympanic membrane as we call them for reptiles. So this is just sort of my concept. I'm gonna have to glue this down. It's not glued down yet, but I wanted to see if it looked right. You know, and it's funny because when I start doing these things, I just make them out of clay, sort of this model magic, like paper clay type stuff. And so I just happen to use whatever color I can get my hands on. So when I'm creating these shapes and they're bright colors, it's a little hard to visualize if it's going to work. So I'm never sure if I like it. So once I get the base going on, that sort of raw sienna base paint, I get a bit better of an idea of how it's going to look. So I kind of like that, and I think that'll work for what I need. I'll probably weather it out. I'm not quite done with the lips. There still needs to be a bit more coloring and detailing there. A little bit work needs to be done on the eyes, but we're almost there with the eyes. So the side project that I spoke of is one that I started yesterday afternoon, just because I realized that I haven't really talked about the first step, where I start, which is with just a raw chunk of foam. And so I started this is Tiki Bat. Tiki Bat will be, when he's done, he'll live in my tiki room, in my basement. But this is sort of the progress that I've made on him. Yesterday, there's a train going by, I'm sorry. I probably should have closed my garage door before I started the live feed. All right, so I just wanted to sort of do something real small and hopefully not that time consuming, just to show how this process works from the beginning to the end. So yesterday, I started from step one, which is basically drawing the shape on a raw block of foam, and then from there, sort of carving it down. So this is our progress so far. If you didn't catch that yesterday, it's available on the Sternberg Facebook page. And I think we also have a Sternberg Museum YouTube page that eventually all of these live feeds are getting put on there. So a couple of places you can go back and watch. We've also what I discovered yesterday is up to this point, I've been sort of having people watch me as I do things in real time. Well, the problem with that is some of this stuff is time consuming and it gets really, really boring to watch in real time. So what I discovered yesterday is I could do a time-lapse video of, in this case, Tiki Bat. So I did one of those and I published that on the Sternberg on the Sternberg Facebook page as well. So that's what we're going to do today. And today we're going to really kind of focus on our other dragon here. So this is dragon number 2 out of 3 that we're going to have for our exhibit. And this is our, what I'm calling Subterranean Dragon. So the idea behind this guy is that he lives in caves, sort of like where there would be an underwater lake or river, sort of like an aquifer system. And he wouldn't come up on the surface very often. He's sort of a subterranean dweller. And when we first conceived of this guy, we thought he might be more like a salamander. And we weren't going to have him have scales. He was going to be very veiny. So I've been using my Skeletor over here as an example of how I was going to approach his skin. You can see what's going on here is I've actually got foam, and this is covered by sort of like a t-shirt material, which is then covered by several layers of what I call rubber cement paint. And I was able to paint like this kind of gross veiny detail on there. So that's what I had initially envisioned for our Subterranean Dragon, to be a very salamander-like creature with very translucent skin and veins peeking through. But something wasn't quite sitting right with that idea with me. Number one, most of our dragons that we're building are much more like classic reptiles, not amphibians. And while I like the idea of having that thin skin and a gross, veiny detail, it just wasn't quite working right in my head, because that's where most of this stuff is right now, is in my head. Like I said yesterday, there is no roadmap or blueprint for these kinds of things, and it's always been really, really difficult for me to get my ideas out onto paper or to describe this to other people. It just has to kind of happen organically. So it's a little bit of a weird process. Sometimes I'm frustrating to work with, be warned. So it was yesterday or the day before, I think it was the day before, Reese and I went out on the nature trail. And we were sort of exploring around, and we had stopped at one of the boards that we lay down so that we can flip them up and see what's living under there. We do that a lot to tag and catalog reptiles. So when I was out with Reese earlier this week, we flipped up one of those things open, there was nothing under there. And right after we ended our live feed, on the walk back into the museum, Reese and I came across another board, flipped that open, and sure enough, there was a skink, a little skink living under this thing. And he's got a very similar body style to the salamander that I was thinking of. Very long and skinny body with these little legs, and long tail. And I thought, gosh, that looks a lot like the dragon that I'm thinking I want to create for the Subterranean Dragon. And in this case, the little skink is living under a board. He had actually excavated himself a little apartment underneath the board, so he was living large. And in fact, as it turns out, this morning's live feed that Reese did this morning, he actually went back and filmed our friend the skink who was living under our board. So if you want to reference what I'm talking about, watch today's earlier live feed from 10 a.m. this morning with Reese, and he actually finds this little skink. So sometime early this morning, I put it all together. I want to model our Subterranean Dragon after what skinks look like. But I wanted to still kind of keep that that idea of a lighter color, sort of a sort of translucent seeming color that you would find from an animal that doesn't live in the light. It's going to be lighter complected. So what I came up with is the blue-tongued skink. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God, he almost looks like a dragon. There's very, very little imagination here that really has to go. So I thought that is the pattern that I am going to model our Subterranean Dragon after. And I might even give him a big blue tongue too. I love the color of that eye. Look at that eye. So he's changed a little bit in the last couple of days. I hope my students don't hate me for making this executive decision, because up to this point we were thinking something really sort of cave salamander like, and I kind of changed the parameters, so no mutinies. So this is sort of what I've done so far. I've started the face detail, and I've tried to sort of match it up as closely as I can with the pattern of our skink. So you can see I've gotten most of his face done there. His eyes are going to need a little more work. I've got to do some carving on his eyes. I am going to keep the gill slits. I think that's a really cool thing that will be part of our mythology, our make-believe part, because dragons actually are a combination of a bunch of different kinds of animals. So there's no reason why I still couldn't give him gills. So I'm still going to stick with that original design. He's just going to look a little more skink-like rather than salamander. So what I've done here in the last, couple of hours is, started texturing his face, giving him his more detailed scale work, and then I'm going to give it the same treatment that I gave the terrestrial dragon, which is he will be covered in rubber cement paint, likely a lighter sort of beige or whitish color, and I'll decide what other colors I want to put in there to complement it. And he will have massive teeth. You can't have a dragon without massive teeth, so he's still going to have very big teeth, but they're going to be very specialized for eating fish and things like that. So they will be long, spike-like teeth. So what I'm going to do is, this is actually going to be a very, very short live feed, and what I'm going to do is upload a video that we shot earlier that is a, what is it called?
Time-lapse.
Time-lapse, thank you. Time-lapse video of basically the process so far of adding the details onto the head and face of this creature, just so people can see how this works and sort of see the process, but you don't have to sit through an hour and a half of me going, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, because that gets boring. So just an update on the progress of our dragons. I will probably upload another short time lapse of some progress on Tiki Bat a little bit later, so we can sort of see how this process works from beginning to end, because I think Tiki Bat's going to be easy to finish and get done in a reasonable amount of time, whereas these guys are probably going to go on for a couple more weeks. And this is only the second of 3 dragons that I've got to put together, so I'll be starting a 3rd dragon here sometime in the near future. So anyways, stay tuned. Look for the video that will be uploaded shortly after this live feed ends, if you're interested in how this process works. And as always, please like and share our live feeds. We do 2 a day, one at 10 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. Central. Thank you for your support, and hopefully I'll see everybody later.